Society imposes what it thinks it knows best. I think that needs to be totally revisited. I wasn't imprisoned or compartmentalised or straitjacketed by the structure of classical cooking. We've got the opportunities to reignite our relationship with food. Food was my mechanism for discovery. The sound of the sea, the orange and beetroot jelly, the stuff with the nitrogen, they're there because there's a story behind them. Ultimately, it's about generating emotion, and human beings have an innate need to connect with something. Cooking and eating the food that we cook made us human. I used to tell people I was driven by fear of failure, and maybe I was. But in fact, there's a point when it flipped. The fear was then surpassed by the belief.
How can one guy with no training at a cottage in Bray that's nowhere near London create this, phenomenon?
Because I'm a human being. Because anyone can do it if their belief becomes stronger than their fear. Open the door and celebrate the beauty of being a human being and this beauty of imagination. I'm going to have a bloody good go at influencing the way that we approach our food. Question everything.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs, sharing our vulnerability, overcoming our fears, transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
At London Real, I don't often get starstruck, but it happened this week with Heston Blumenthal. And funny enough, I actually met Heston back in 2008 when, as a greedy banker, I took one of my clients out to his restaurant, The Fat Duck in Bray. He has a 3-star Michelin restaurant. He's been voted Best Restaurant of the Year. And Heston is a genius when it comes to the neuroscience of food. He says it's one of the most complicated things that the human body does is flavor perception. And Heston is a master of just challenging everything you thought was normal and messing with your brain when it comes to flavors, food, and perception. And I was so excited to sit down with Heston, and he blew my mind, talking about how he uses food to get us connected, because we all walk around so disconnected, and how he can show you what it's like to live a beautiful human life by presenting you something on a dish. And again, I was super excited. Heston went everywhere and talked about everything, but not just food. We talked about consciousness, about perfection, about creativity. He's a big fan of our episodes with David Icke and Sadhguru, and I know you're going to love this adventure down the rabbit hole into Heston Blumenthal's brain. So without any further ado, here is the man himself. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Heston Blumenthal, the British chef, restaurant owner, author, and pioneer of multi-sensory cooking. You own 6 restaurants and are known internationally for The Fat Duck, which has 3 Michelin stars, and is famous for dishes like bacon and egg ice cream, mock turtle soup, and snail porridge. You've written many books, starred in television shows, and are a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry and the Royal Academy of Culinary Arts. In 2006, you were awarded the O.B.E. by Her Majesty the Queen for your services to British gastronomy. Heston, welcome to London Real.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to live up to that introduction. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. We're all pretty excited. And we actually met about 11 years ago. I just showed you a picture of younger versions of both of us. I had trekked out to the Fat Duck with one of my clients from Lehman Brothers when I was in banking. And I think I'd seen you on Search for Perfection, maybe one of your television shows. And I remember we went there and I was asking, can I meet Heston? And they were like, he's really busy. And you came to the table and then we went outside and we had a picture. And I just, I don't remember much from 2008, but I remember the meal at the Fat Duck. And I just remember you taking everything I thought I knew about perception and food and taste and just, I almost felt like it was sleight of hand because it was just challenging me. Things I thought were fruits were savory and things I thought were savory or sweet. And then the waitress said, "Good morning," and then made the bacon and egg ice cream at the table.
Oh, yes.
And then, and there was an egg and she cracked it, but there wasn't an egg in there. And my brain just kept just saying, what's happening? And everything was being challenged. The sounds of the sea, where there was this seafood dish that looked like a beach with foam, and then inside the shell there were an iPod in there to put headphones. This is before iPhones even. And there was this auditory experience. And again, like I said, I don't remember much from that year, but I remember that meal.
Fantastic.
And so
Fantastic.
I was wondering, when you do things like that, what are you trying to do to humans, to us, when we come in to that experience?
I think ultimately it's about generating emotion. And human beings have an innate need to connect with something. With themselves, with another individual, with nature, with social media, with drugs, with alcohol. I mean, if we can't connect with ourselves and connect with nature and connect with the people that we love, there's more chances of us finding something else to connect with. And that is really driven by our emotions. And I think that we like, generally, if we discover something that we love discovering, we love the feeling of discovering it, and it might be a particular sunset or a bottle of wine. There's an element of us that will want to share some of that with people that we want to impress or we care about. Right. And so I suppose some of this was about me sharing my voyage and journey of discovery. I'm self-taught, and that was it was a double-edged sword. It was fantastic because I wasn't, imprisoned or compartmentalized or straitjacketed by the structure of classical cooking and that educational process. The downside was it took me a lot longer. I had to work a lot harder because I had to learn by my organizational skills, where I've got a fairly full-on ADHD, which I wouldn't change for the world.
Right.
So it kind of forced me to get very organized in the kitchen. So if I discovered something, so for example, at work, here, if I take this coffee and it works really well with a glass of red wine.
Okay.
Also, we can work with the basil leaf. Something that the second mouthful is exactly the same as the first.
Okay.
A plate of food, each full might be a little bit different.
Right.
So I've got a milky coffee here. If I then have a sip, I close my eyes and I imagine somebody that fills me with love and happiness.
I'm going to do this with you.
Okay, so and what we're looking about is one sharper and bitter than the other?
Okay.
So the first thing, you imagine somebody that fills you with love and happiness, positive thought. You can't think anything bad, and have a sip. Just picture that person. Now immediately, you don't have to tell me. Don't tell me who it is. Picture somebody in your life historically that fills you with negative thoughts. So bitterness, jealousy, anger, hatred, rejection. Now have another sip.
Okay.
It gets bitter.
It's noticeably different.
It's noticeably. This is probably this is only in the last, this year that I discovered this.
It's noticeably different, and yet I have a classic engineering training background from MIT, and that would tell me that it can't be different, right? And we're always taught that the palate is only 5 things, right? And we're all,
It is, but your saliva is what the connection between this vertical line that connects our genitals with our gut, our organs, all our heads and our brains. There's so much goes on there. Up, down, continual symbiotic exchange of information. Right. So when you feel fear, if you imagine, I remember watching maybe Jaws or something, a really scary bit. One metaphor for it is I've got a pit in my stomach.
Right.
Or it's cold, but you don't go cold here. The feeling is across here. Right. And all we have inside our bodies is, we've got over 100 trillion microbes, bacteria. And there are more bacteria in every living human being than all human beings that have ever existed on the planet. And imagine inside, it's just like a little mini universe. So if this system experiences fear in its defense mechanisms, that's where it comes from. If we're scared, it affects our eating. But we're so distracted with everything in modern society today that we don't notice.
Right.
But that's, my God, it's a big difference. So basil leaf, you just tear it in half, it's much more bitter. It really is, and it's quite. And if you do the left with wine, I haven't done it with coffee. Left hand or right hand is different. If I write the word wine, it's a good excuse to have a glass of wine actually. But write the word wine with really rounded letters like balloons, and then write the word wine in really jaggedy, sharp letters. Have a sip with the round letters. That actually also works for coffee.
Right. And you do this on your menus at the Fat Duck. You play with fonts.
I've
like
been doing that for the last, ever since '97. I put a dish on the menu which was crab ice cream. When I first discovered that there was a history of savoury ices, and I love Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland, and the thing I love about that book, possibly the most, is that she continually has conversations with herself. So we have our outer and inner universe, our objective, subjective universe. So when I first saw a savoury ice, it was a Parmesan ice cream, Italian recipe in a book. And I thought, that's weird. So I stopped myself and I thought, Heston, why should I think that's weird? So I have a little think, maybe it's because I've never heard of it before. So it's a bit of a contrasting shock to the system.
Right, back to your mantra, question everything, right?
That's what you question everything. Two different perspectives. So question everything and everything. So the universe as a whole is everything, but also every single thing. So you have to look at the detail and the bigger, and it's continually almost like zooming in, out, in, out, in, out. If you're not careful, you just zoom out or you just zoom in.
Right.
And so all of this discovery with crab ice cream, I did it because I was savoury ices, and I found that it was a bit of a Marmite effect at the time. People don't really bat an eyelid now when you say crab ice cream. Things have changed. And that led, if you said to somebody, taste this, it's crab ice cream, some of them might be visibly, what? If you say, taste this, it's a frozen crab bisque. That's okay then. And I noticed that it had a difference in the way that it ate. That led to the first paper I was involved with, which was Sussex University, a guy called Martin Yeomans. And he had this idea to do this with smoked salmon. So we did frozen smoked salmon mousse or smoked salmon parfait. That was one, or the same dish, but called smoked salmon ice cream.
Okay.
And it was perceived to be 10 to 15% saltier when it was called smoked salmon ice cream.
Because they expected something different.
And it's contrast. So before any of the senses comes contrast.
Right.
And the contrasting emotions is how we tell stories. So if you want to have a jumpy bit in the film, then put a serene bit before it.
Right, okay. And so you bring all of these ideas into your cooking and presentation and the whole experience.
Yes, so in closing the loop, and the very long answer I gave to you about the first question was about the senses. Actually, it's about emotion. So the senses, and with the senses, there's two, we've got the five, so the sense of touch, taste, smell, sight, sound. We also need to add proprioception, which is awareness of movement of our body,
right,
and interoception, which is what's happening inside us, feelings and emotions and awareness.
Okay.
So all of those things together are our survival, or make up part of our survival kit, a really key part. And then I just sort of, if you keep on, why is a great question. So question everything. If you ask somebody, okay, what's your favorite ice cream?
Mine?
Yeah.
I like a good chocolate ice cream. I like a chocolate salted caramel ice cream.
Okay, why?
Oh my gosh. Because it's salty and sweet and I like chocolate.
The last bit you get in there.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. For me, chocolate was always a celebration, It was always a win. It was always something rare because we weren't allowed it as a kid.
So if you say, now the bit where I can't ask why anymore, if you say, because I love it,
okay,
or when I eat it, I was so happy. That's the bit. There's nothing I can think of after emotion. Cause and effect thinking, we're driven by emotion. We might be driven by fear of failure, can influence us, the want to succeed, the want for pleasure, the want for happiness or fulfillment. And with food, I think that one of the things we need to look at, if we can approach, and we won't remember to do this every time we eat, of course, we've got other things to get on with. If we can approach our food by feeling fulfilled rather than full, if we focus on the feeling of full, then our relationship with our food is always based on that feeling of full. And there's a lag, there's a delay. So the food that's better for your the microbes lower down in your gut takes longer to feel full because they have to work harder for a reward.
Okay.
So if you focus on feeling full, now I'm full now, but by the time you feel full, you've already eaten too much. And then you start getting cross with yourself because you think, I don't like this feeling. So we start this funny relationship with food. But if you can feel fulfilled, and that sort of means just slow down eating. And there's a great, a classic mindfulness thing with a raisin. But so just imagine you take a raisin and you look at it and hold it under the light and you see where the creases are. And you'll see there's a shine, maybe a bit of a shine where the light's reflecting off the raisin, depending on how moist it is. How big are the creases? What's the contrast between the light and dark? Is it more pointy on one end than the other? You can just extend that for as long as you want to, and then you roll it between your thumb and forefinger with different pressures, and you think, oh, how does that feel on my forefinger? How does it feel on my thumb? Is it softening? Is it warming up? And at the same time, you could imagine maybe there's a farmer who's been in a family tradition of a couple of 100 years that have worked tirelessly to harvest these raisins, and imagine where the trees come from and how they've packaged it and all of that stuff. And then you can then bring it towards your mouth and you smell it and try left and right nostril. They're slightly different. It's a bit like when you look at something through here, close one eye and the other, it moves. It's basically quantum, two different states at the same time, two different perspectives. So then you put it to your lip. The feeling on your top and bottom lip aren't exactly the same, and then you can feel in your teeth, and what are you tasting? It's a bit of sweet, there's a bit of acidity there, maybe a bit of spices, I'm getting something else. Roll it around your tongue. You can just play this out.
Right.
All of a sudden, that little insignificant raisin gets value. It becomes more precious and more valuable.
Yeah.
And that's in a way that I think how we've evolved as human beings.
And you mentioned those early days as so grew up, driven a bit by your parents and them looking for more. What causes you to start that restaurant and go through those early days? When I look at your history, it takes so much time.
Yeah.
You accelerated getting those stars, but it just seems to me like it's years and years and years before you're recognized for something you're doing, and it's a day in, day out, trying to have something, the ultimate of perfection. That boggles my mind.
When I look back at it, yes, it is. And even now, things I was doing 20 years ago are now becoming new things. And I think at the time, I don't know, it's a very good point that what kept me going. I mean, I suppose I threw myself in. I was self-taught. So my first paid job as a chef was opening the Duck.
Right.
I jumped in. I had no choice. So I don't know, for the first 10 years, I think I had about 20 hours a week sleep. 120 hours a week I was working.
You used to sleep in the
Sleep
laundry,
in the laundry, yeah,
upstairs.
And levels of exhaustion I never knew existed. Now, had I have had a choice, I don't even know if I can answer this. I'm so pleased I did stick with it. But had I have had a choice then, with some of those levels of exhaustion I got to, would I be able to? I don't know.
If you had a choice, meaning if everything wasn't riding on that.
Yeah, if
you had a way out.
Yes.
Okay.
At the time. Now, I look at it very, very differently. In the Hind's Head, so we've got the Fat Ducker next door, we've got a pub with a Michelin star, the Hind's Head.
Right.
300, 400-year-old building, and there's a fireplace. There's a fireplace there with a phrasing gold leaf, and I've walked past this thousands of times. And only in about the last year or so did I realise the importance of this phrase, this sentence. It says, "Fear knocked on the door, faith answered." No one was there. And
What does that mean to you?
to me, it means that when I use the word potential, everything on this planet has potential. So even the receptors behind our eyeballs are called action potentials. It's the potential for action, potential for action. Cold can only exist with the potential of hot. Batman only exists with the potential of Joker. If Joker didn't there, he couldn't put his fancy PVC latex suit on and go and fight crime. You need crime to fight it. Right. And now, if you look at Nietzsche, said you've got to feel pain to have pleasure. That I think that's also can be translated in different ways. You don't have to feel pain, but every human being goes through some level of suffering in some shape or form. Yeah. And every individual's level of suffering is no greater or lesser than another individual's. It's relative to their own situation. And so I'm not saying we have to have fear to have a belief or faith, let's say, because it's fear and faith like hot and cold. Yeah. It's only when the hot becomes hotter than the cold, or the fast becomes faster than the slow, or the oxygen becomes greater than the CO2, or the faith becomes stronger than the fear, that determines the direction you're going. Right. When the fear becomes stronger than the belief, well, then you become pulled by fear. When the belief becomes stronger than the fear, you get pulled by the belief. And I realised, and this is with this significance, it's so funny, I just walked past it and maybe subconsciously it did go in.
Probably.
My belief was so strong, and it wasn't about getting a load of awards, because every time I got one,
you didn't feel any better.
It's never enough.
Never enough.
It was like a drug, elation, and then you come and doubt, I need another one. But it was never enough.
Right.
But the belief, in fact, was those emotions, I think. I'm not, there's something out there, rather than, every year we say everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. There's a reason for everything happening. And it happens in both directions again at the same time. So this discovery, when I started becoming more aware and then becoming aware of becoming aware, and I get those moments of excitement when I discover something. Maybe I discover something that somebody else shows me. Maybe I discover something for myself. Or I have all these what if questions that get me really excited. And there's more, well, there's not more, I was going to say there's more to life than what. So I don't know where I was going with that sentence. However, every breath is a potential new life. Because just becoming aware of our breath one time, you can go back and revisit everything that you've experienced. So you're continually working in many different directions, and then that's when time starts to expand, because it's when time becomes valuable, becomes richer.
Mm. And when the end of that quote it says, "and no one was there," does that mean that all of this is kind of an illusion in our brains?
Yeah.
And that we're fighting these internal battles? And
Totally.
okay.
It's exactly.
At the end of the day, none of this matters.
Yeah.
And all of it matters, and there is no time, and
absolutely,
it is what it is.
Yeah.
And then back to that fear and faith. Like, you need to ask yourself that question: what is that fear, and what is your faith? And then if nothing's going to happen at the end of the day, then why don't we just all be everything we can be, or why don't we investigate everything we can?
Yeah. All of a sudden, it's like a new universe opens up again and again and again for discovery.
Right.
And you said you had Sadhguru on here. That's something that I think he'd mentioned. I don't know if it was, I've seen it somewhere, but it was a great quote: "If you can't value death, then how can you begin to value life?" Instead of being scared of death, because the more scared we are with death, the more we restrict ourselves with enjoyment of life. Because then faith knocked on the door, fear answered,
right.
And then no one was there.
Right.
So the whole thing can, and it generally does that. It keeps flipping.
And that's on a mantle place for a 300-year-old pub.
350-year-old.
Deep thinkers back in
I know,
England.
in gold leaf.
Wow.
And I don't know, I would love to know where that came from. I don't know if it's out of a book. I have no idea. It's just on the fireplace, and it's been there for at least 300 years. And I used to tell people I was driven by fear of failure. And maybe I was. But in fact, there's a point when it flipped, and the belief, the fear,
right,
was then surpassed by the belief. And I don't know, people could think that it's easy for me to say, you know, all these awards, and I've got all this stuff, so I can say that I'm not dismissing them. You know, I've got a friend who used to be Will Greenwood, played ex-England rugby player, and I said to Will, he's brilliant, I love him. I said, what would have happened if you turned up to the final of the Rugby World Cup and Australia were disqualified and you won the cup? And he thinks a lot, so he sat there for a few seconds and said, you know, I'll probably have the same or similar level of elation in the instant. He said, but it would have very quickly fallen off a cliff. And he said something like, I couldn't think of life after that. When I imagine that now, he said the England team were on their last legs, they won everything for 2 years, but they're right at the end of their world domination period, then they just got over the line. However, they earned their reward. And this is when I mentioned earlier, working for reward. We have a set of hormones called their reward hormones, reward mechanisms that evolve through hunting for food. And when you don't work for something, that's why lottery winners, you never hear of that many lottery winners going on to do, I'm sure there's always going to be exceptions. But when you work for something, it becomes much more valuable.
Right.
It's like for food, if you go foraging, or you catch a fish, or you know, even something like a bottle of wine. If you go to the vineyard and you see the winemaker and you're with him and he tells you a bit about whatever, and then you have a bottle of wine.
Yeah, story, narrative, work, everything. Right.
That's all the whole reward system. We're flushed with these hormones that have evolved in order to keep us alive, both from a fear and a wanting.
So you started off as a storyteller, and also you were just curious and passionate about food.
Yes.
And why food?
Because a couple of things I realise now. I was born in London.
What was it like back then?
In the 60s.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember Jacques Chirac. There was a G7 summit meeting. I did an interview with one of the main TV channels outside the Fat Duck at the same week when this G7 summit was on in Gleneagles. I don't know if you remember this. It was shortly before the Olympics.
Okay.
London, Paris fighting out.
Okay.
And apparently Jacques Chirac said, Britain has the worst food in Europe, second only to Finland. Now, no offence to any Finnish people, but that was a bit of I took big offence to that. And this is a person, because my old maitre d' served him in a G7 meeting in France, and he drank beer all the way through his meal. But he just dismissed British, and I'm proud to be British. My name sounds a lot more exotic, but you know, and I love this country. I took big offence to that, and within a couple of weeks, London and Paris fought it out for the Olympics. And I checked this with Seb Coe. About 2 years ago, I saw him and I asked him, and he said, yes, it's true. There are a few other things going on, but it's true. Building up to the Olympics, Jacques Chirac said that comment. The two Finnish representatives pulled their votes from Paris and gave them to London. So my argument is we got the Olympics because of our food, because of our cooking. Maybe not because it was perceived to be so bad. But probably in the 60s, 70s, you know, he wasn't far off. I mean, I grew up, my mum was and is a good cook. There was only one type of pasta you could buy in the supermarket, and it was spaghetti in a blue packet. You couldn't buy olive oil from the supermarket. You had to pour it into your ears. It was for blocked ears. To this day, that's another question I'd like to know. Why olive oil and not other oil? Yeah. But that's what you did with it. Height of luxury was an avocado vinaigrette with malt vinegar. And we went to Cornwall every year for our holiday. And one year my dad had a leasing business, and his business did pretty well, so we went to France. Never been to France. And my dad read about this 3 Michelin-starred restaurant, and my parents had never been to a 1-star before, let alone 3. So I went with them, with my sister, and this restaurant was called the L'Hosto de Beaumanière, and I live 15 minutes down the road from it. Wow. So I've come back to the...
Full circle.
And I sat in this shaded terrace outside this old Provençal farmhouse in a valley of incredible rocks called the Valley of Hell. Just the way the rocks, the porosity of the rocks, they've receded over the years and they look like, gargoyles. Wow. And there's one of the most beautiful villages in France, Les Baux, named Baux, because it's all bauxite. And it was lit up at night. Wow. And the noise, we arrived, and I remember the sun was going down and the noise of the crickets started to it's funny, I can hear a fridge. And there's a little high-pitched whirring sound from the fridge, which isn't too far away from the noise of the crickets.
Wow, still remember that.
And that came up as the sun went down, and then this rock was lit up at night with the big, like Jean Cocteau's son, because the guy's grandfather that started it was very good friends with Picasso and Jean Cocteau, and this pointy sun beamed onto the rock, and the sommelier came up with a handlebar moustache, leather apron, little metal Tastafan, and when you're small, everything seems massive. A wireless that was like a billboard or something from the 10 Commandments palette from a Cecil B. DeMille film, and I've never seen wine glasses. They seemed this big. Never seen anything like it. Crickets going, chink of glasses, the noise of the feet of the waiting staff crunching on gravel, and this unbelievable smell of lavender. I come from London and Cornwall. I mean, it didn't get anything like that. Yeah. And it was as if I'd fallen down a rabbit hole into some multi-sensory wonderland. And that's when cooking got whether I liked it or not, it sort of like hit me from a bolt from a bolt from the blue, under my skin, in my blood. That was it. It's like it was something had grabbed hold of me. And
how old were you?
15.
Okay.
15. I did the odd, like a mum's birthday with my sister trying to cook something really badly. Kids do. But otherwise, that was it. And I think, again, contrast. The more quicker or the more powerful a contrast is, the more impact it can have. And I think that had I grown up with, I didn't know what an oyster looked like. So had I grown up with oysters and lobsters and Michelin-starred restaurants, it's still an incredible place. But it wouldn't have had as much impact on me.
Right.
As, I love a Cornish pasty, but that was my summer holiday was the back of a boot of a car with the rain, after having a windbreaker experience on the beach in Cornwall, eating a Cornish pasty out of a brown paper bag. And here I was in this place in Provence with this incredible sounds and smells and everything happening. And I wanted to be a chef, I wanted to cook. But I realised now I actually wanted that, it was that emotion that I experienced at that time. It sounds really kind of cheesy to say, they call it an awakening. I don't know what to, but it was like, I'd fallen down a rabbit hole.
And you wanted to recreate that moment for other people.
Yes.
In different ways.
Yes, and I think the benefit, looking at this is the pleasure, pain thing, that sometimes when we're restricted, that gives us the opportunity to expand in other directions, to compensate for the restriction. And the fat duck, as you've seen, was so small. I didn't have a bauxite cliff. I didn't have crickets. I didn't have lavender. I could have.
It's a humble cottage.
It's a humble
and
little
back then
cottage.
In 08, the decor was really plain.
It was so plain. So I put my sounds, my crickets went on an iPod, and my lavender went into a little spritzer bottle and stuff like that. And my sunlight, I had to use the lighting I had in the restaurant, or those sorts of things.
But how can one guy with no training at a cottage in Bray that's nowhere near London, really, it's hard to get to, create this, phenomenon?
Because I'm a human being. because anyone can do it. They can only do it. Anyone who's able-bodied, let's say, able-bodied, able-mind, able senses, can do it only if their belief becomes stronger than their fear. And I think everybody has something that they could be incredibly good at, that they would love doing, that they would believe in doing. There's a whole, it's a bit like evolution in the sense that we are here, there's millions, almost an infinite, there'll be an infinite number of things that have happened to get us, Homo sapiens, to this position. And, had I have not grown up in London with the food in Britain in the year that it was in, had I have not had the small, tiny, fat duck, or had I have not gone to that place in France, had my dad not done the job that he did and had that year that he had that enabled us to go to France, had we not gone to Cornwall before, there's so many things that are there. And what I love with memory, and this comes back to why I think Alzheimer's and dementia again is terrible. I could never be saying these things if I'd lost my memory.
Right.
I can going back to revisit the past, and it expands again. So the past is a new life, and expand it. And I can sort of observe myself, observing myself, and not know that I'm not going to have all the answers to the questions. If I did, then I'd been a black hole probably.
Do you think we're all sitting on our own fat duck? It's just that fear is getting in the way.
Yes.
And we need to have the faith and at least answer that door. Because the truth is there's no one there, right?
There's no one there. That's exactly it. There's no one. That's exactly it. There's no one there.
It's in our heads. It's a phantom in our head.
Yeah.
And there's so much potential beauty and joy we could share with each other if we all just open the door.
Exactly. Just open the door. Just open the door. And this is human, celebrate the beauty of being a human being and this beauty of imagination. The beauty of imagination and storytelling and connecting. The beauty of it is computers can't do that. They can't do that.
No.
And
not worried about AI taking over our food experience.
Well, we have to be. Well, I think we do have to be careful or be aware that we are moving towards a species without a gut. And if you take the principle that the Big Bang, because the Big Bang started off, there was space, and then when something arrived in space, a thing arrived, and then it reacted with it, time started, and it just a Big Bang. So unimaginable, I missed a syllable or two there. Unimaginable levels of temperature, unimaginably small levels of time. Did this, and then it started to come back together again. So then the gases became dust and particles, and then formed planets, etc., etc. So we came from that stuff, and who said that? We came from dust and will return to dust. Mm. So computers, robots, they don't need feeding. They need feeding in a different way. If we don't value, if we don't value the beauty of human beings and the beauty that we've all got inside us, there will be a batch of, I believe Yuval Harari, the Homo Deus book, when he wrote, we're moving, I think he called it the useless humans or something. I think that was his phrase. But if we're not careful, we've invented these amazing things. I used to get so frustrated with telephones as well, because for several reasons, until I realised Plato had something called etiology, objective, subjective universe. And our objective universe is all the objects that were there before us, the mountains and trees, and there's also our human-created objective universe, like chairs and tables and telephones. Our subjective universe is our relationship with those objects. Right. So rather than me hating telephones, actually, a telephone is a telephone. It has the potential for everything, or has the potential for many things. So it's my relationship with the telephone. And we should embrace, I would love to do a restaurant with robots. Because robots they're nowhere near knowing or getting a robot to pour liquid from one vessel into another. Nowhere near. Something so simple, take my tea or coffee, hang on a second. I'm greedy, I've got tea and coffee. Should call it toffee. But that movement,
Right.
I decided, I poured it, I changed the rate of pouring.
Yeah.
I stopped, I poured it all in, I'd already calculated that it was okay, the quantity wasn't going to overflow. If that was custard or Coca-Cola, I'd have poured it at a different rate.
Right.
But I wouldn't have been aware of all of this, you just do it. There's no robot that can do this on the planet yet. They're miles away from it. But they're also managing to do some amazing things with robots that we're surprised that they can do. So this is a good pointer, I think, to use robots to celebrate the beauty of human beings. And we are getting closer and closer to robots taking greater control. I mean, now a lot of the law firms, it's a big concern of theirs. They're looking at how they're going to deal with the future, because the algorithms are going to calculate, if a legal case is won on a semicolon being in the wrong spot, well, who needs a human to do that? So there's an element of these jobs that are going to be, but what you can't do, having human connection.
Right.
You can't have, through standard social media, you lose human connection. So you and I couldn't have this connection, wouldn't be the same if we did it with my fat fingers, typing. But that, again, it's connectivity. There was a great quote that was, have you seen, there's a site called In a Nutshell? Very, very good. It's very well researched as well. They had one on addiction. So everything we know about addiction is wrong. Heroin, diamorphine, is pure, like the purest heroin you can get. But you don't turn, the hospital system doesn't turn your great aunt into a heroin addict after she's had a hip replacement, but she'll still be on diamorphine. And what heroin does, it suppresses all the pain receptors, both physical and emotional pain. That's where its danger is. If we, if we feel judged, many people, they might go and eat for comfort, they might take drugs, they might drink more alcohol, they might get obsessed with the gym. There's all sorts of things we do to try and connect with something. And it ends up, say, the opposite to addiction is not sobriety. The opposite to addiction, or the answer to addiction, is connection. So if we can connect with nature, ourselves, and others, that's I think one of the most critical things, and we're becoming increasingly disconnected.
Right. Yeah, I'm living proof of that. So yeah, when I was disconnected, I was an addict. I was an alcoholic. I actually had a heroin overdose in New York City about 20 years ago.
Wow, did you?
And I was disconnected. And when I started connecting,
yeah,
actually thanks to a lot of what this show does.
Yes. I was just about to say that. Actually.
All of those things, they just kind of dissolve away when I was connected. But when I was the greedy banker, I was very disconnected, and I couldn't find connection.
Yeah.
So it's powerful.
Your connection would have been from these other things. And there was they talk about the Rat Park, which is one of the I can't remember the guy's name, one of the most famous drug experiments in the 60s or 70s. Was his name Anderson? A rat in a cage, I think it was cocaine and water, and it would take the cocaine and then it would keep on going back to the cocaine until it died. And this professor, noticed that actually the rat was on its own. So he made Rat Park So he's put rats with his family of rats, and they had like slides, and I think they say all the rat about town would like. Some of the rats took the cocaine, sometimes, occasionally, and some didn't. None of them got addicted. None of them died. And then they go on to talk about the Vietnam War and how small percentage of people got addicted.
Yeah.
If you come out of a situation which, like Vietnam, could be like a cage, you take it to numb, and then you go back. This is why I think lots of clinics don't work. They might work for some people, but if you come back out of the clinic into your society, your life, and your life is still the same as before when you went in,
right, you're
going to go back. It's not enough. You're going to go. You need to change. You need to find that connection, and I think that's the most important thing is being able to find. It's easier when you're younger, obviously. When I say younger, as toddlers grow up, but we do continually impose. Society imposes what it thinks it knows best in life, and I think that needs to be totally revisited.
Yeah. We also have this real clinical relationship with chemicals and food and all of that, and we're not taking through the narrative, the emotional, the nostalgic, all of these things.
Exactly, yes. That's the focus, really the big focus of my work now.
Okay.
Is our relationship with things. So we can't yet measure all the specific emotions. Again, they're emotions, we've given them names.
Yeah.
But they all have frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, language in itself is something that slows us down and messes things up because we throw words at it. And we all bring, like you said, something different to that word.
Yes,
yeah.
And I think the vibrations as well, the tonality and the vibrations of our voices. There was a piece recently that said that, I don't know what some research and I've been saying this for a couple of years now, that the language and the tonality of the language that we use can change our DNA and our RNA. It's a vibration. And you vibrate something enough, it's going to change. And that I noticed if you're laughing with somebody and you're connected and you can chat and gossip in fun and have a laugh, and you don't finish feeling tired. But there's days if you end up trying to explain things to people a lot, and maybe getting frustrated can be exhausting. And that must be the connection between the intent of where those words are coming from and then trying to find the words and then not knowing if the words you're using are, oh God, I'm getting a lot better now. But God knows some of the things, people must have thought I was a complete loony before.
What the things you were saying?
Yeah. When I started going into this connection between, trying to explain the connection between quantum, string theory, relativity, Big Bang, evolution, cosmology, mineralogy, feelings and emotions, and tie it all through food, it was really clear in my head.
And you've always thought this way? Or like for the past 10 years?
The past 10 years, yeah. And particularly the last 5.
Do you think you're misunderstood? Do people just see the dish and they say, oh, wow, and they don't necessarily understand all of what's happening?
Previously, yes. Previously, I don't know, maybe misunderstood, maybe just not understood, maybe, I think there's probably quite a few different things. I think there were times when I was frustrated that I thought that people didn't understand me, when I look back at it.
Okay.
I'm not sure how aware I was of it at the time. But without that feeling, and without then trying to justify myself, I wouldn't hear the words coming out of my mouth. And that's a learning process.
Right.
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.